You don't know what love is. We'll do that like that. You don't know what love is. You know, the name of this series that we're doing here on me is called Life Beyond the Third Fret. And there's a little story about how that title came to be. I used to teach over at the Brooklyn Conservatory of Music years ago. And I had a lot of bass students and guitar students and a couple of jazz workshops that I did. And there was this one student I had. His name was Ken Mackin. And Ken was like he played folk guitar and blues guitar a little bit. And he knew, you know, a little bit. He was just trying to get a little further. Very smart young man, by the way. Ken spoke 7 languages. He was a computer expert. He also knew karate. He was a quite remarkable young man. Anyway, one day we was in my studio there at the school taking a lesson, and I was talking about harmony and how triads worked and dividing up the strings into groups of 3s and all kinds of stuff. Maybe later on in the video I could get more detail about that too, about any of those of you who might want a harmony lesson. Anyway, during that lesson, Ken started to chuckle a little bit, and he's laughing. I said, "What's the matter, Ken? Did I say something funny?" He says, "Well, you're always saying something funny, Carl." He says, "I was just sitting here thinking." He says, "I always wondered what life was like beyond the third fret." He says, "I guess this is it." So I told him, I says, "Ken," at that time I was working on a book on harmony and how chords work. And I was looking for a title, and I told him, I says, "You know, Ken, I've always prided myself in being an individual and not taking anybody's ideas, but I got to do it." I said, "Would you mind if I use that for the title of my book?" And he says, "Not at all, it'd be my pleasure." I said, "I promise I won't tell anybody." He said he promised he wouldn't tell anybody, you know, that was really his. I said, "No, I think it won't matter to me, you know." Anyway, that's where that title came from. Ken also, there's a little bit of something else I want to talk about Ken too, because again, I start thinking about all the people who claim they did this and claim they did that, and a lot of it's true, a lot of it isn't, you know. The rainbow bass that I made for Les Claypool, which people tell me is one of the most famous basses on the planet. I don't know how true that is. All I know is that Les Claypool came into my life one day, and he wanted a bass, and I made it for him. I had been sick for a long time, right about that time. My thyroid gland quit working, and I was kind of like in Never Never Land there for a while. And I had just started coming to get my health back, and a young man by the name of Gary Kelly. Actually, I hadn't made, before that, I hadn't made any basses for maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years, because I was having trouble with my illness, and I wasn't playing. I wasn't doing much of anything except trying to get better. Anyway, I was getting stronger, and I had a little workbench I put up in my kitchen because I had closed all the shops that I had at the time. And I put a workbench up in my kitchen just doing little repair work and stuff, whatever I could do. And a young man named Gary Kelly came in, who was a friend of mine, and he wanted a 6-string bass made, and I made that for him. He said he didn't mind waiting. I told myself I wasn't really feeling too good. He said, "I know, Carl, and I want to push these, but I don't want anybody else to make it." So, and that was Gary Kelly's bass was the first bass I made with that little extension on the bottom of the bass, and I think I already said why I did that. It was just to get a better feel on the bridge, I think, Anyway, I did that, and then one day he was at a NAMM show out in California, and he was demonstrating Hartke amplifiers, I think, and Les Claypool saw him there. And this is before Les Claypool was famous. He was just playing the bass, trying to get a gig, I guess, I think he was on his way, but he wasn't famous. And he had already had that piccolo bass that he bought in a pawn shop when he was a kid. And I think at the time he was playing a tuned 6-string bass when he saw Gary. And when he heard Gary playing my bass, he said, "Wow," he says, I don't know why I didn't think of this before, but I'm already have one of this guy's basses." He says, "Do you know how to get in touch with him?" And Gary said, "Sure." And Gary gave him my phone number, and Les called me and said he was going to be coming to New York soon, and him and Larry, the guitar player with Primus, were going to be in town, and could he stop by and see me? And I said, "Sure." So again, you have to remember, he was just Les Claypool. He wasn't Les Claypool, And he came to my apartment, and we sat around and talked about fishing. He likes to fish, and sailing, and I was talking to Larry about harmony on the guitar, and we played a little bit. And during that time, Les told me he wanted a 6-string bass. His only input, his only comments, I should say, were that he wanted a 6-string fretless with one pickup. That was the end of the story right there. He had nothing further to say. He had no idea what he was going to get. At that time, I didn't know what he was going to get.